The National Famine Museum at Strokestown Park and Irish Heritage Trust are screening this film as part of the Great Famine Voices Roadshow 2020 online event series. The Great Famine Voices Roadshow is funded by the Government of Ireland Emigrant Support Programme.
Hi, my name's Paul Barry. I'm a local GP on Merseyside. As you can tell by my surname, Barry is obviously of Irish origin. I've always been aware that the Barry family were originally from Limerick, and in fact John Barry, who is my dad's grandfather, the story from the family was that he walked from Limerick to Dublin and came to Liverpool looking for work on his own. At that point, the family connection seemed limited beyond that, and there was very little apparent interest in my family about our Irish heritage. Over recent years, I've been looking at our own genealogy, and actually I uncovered far more than I expected. It started when I started looking at my great uncle Jimmy O'Donnell, as my interest in the First World War. And I realised that Jimmy actually, it's a whole story about Jimmy, but then I realised that Jimmy O'Donnell was probably of Irish extraction, and his mum, who's my his sister, is my dad's mum, is obviously Mary O'Donnell. I then looked into the O'Donnell family and realised that they were actually from Newport, Mayo. Hugh O'Donnell came over in the 1850s. It's difficult to know beyond that why Hugh came, but I assume, like John Barry, it was as an economic migrant. When looking at Jimmy, I then looked at his other grandparent, who is a lady called Jane Henry. And Jane Henry, and they all lived in Circus Street, which is Little Italy area of Liverpool, where obviously it's a big mix of Irish and Italian immigrants. But the Henry family, I then realised, are actually from Cavan. And Francis Henry again came over sometime in the 1850s. Again, it's difficult to know why he came. He was a simple labourer, as were the Barrys actually. In fact, every single member of my family seems to have had the title labourer or bus conductor, which is typical of what I would expect from the Liverpool Irish, really. So the Henrys, anyway, to go back to them, they're from Cavan. And Francis Henry married Sarah McCoyd in Cavan. But I have little information beyond that. In fact, at the moment, most of my restrictions are based on the Irish side to determine what year they came and more history about them. I then started looking a bit more at John Barry again. So John Barry, this is the guy who came from Limerick. He actually, his father was John Barry and his mother was Elizabeth Shigrew. And we have the baptismal papers from Limerick for that. John Barry, when he came to Liverpool, appeared to live in a boarding house for a while with a lot of other Irish immigrants, and he married a lady called Anne Garrity. And Anne Garrity's dad was a guy called Patrick Garrity, and when I looked into Patrick Garrity is also from Mayo, or possibly the Mayo-Galway border, but I'm struggling to find information about that family beyond that. I then went over to my mother's side, and she's the daughter of a Kerr family. Now, the Kerrs are interesting in that they are actually Protestants, and I'm aware that her father, Johnny Kerr, who was also in the Second World War, actually was a member of the Orange Lodge. His wife was Emma Doherty. Emma Doherty comes from a very strong Catholic family, and I'm aware that there was a great break-up in the family at that point, which is why my mum knows so little about that family tree, because actually neither Emma or John ever had contact with their own families properly ever again, because a Catholic married a Protestant. Now, to us in this society now, that seems very strange. But Emma, anyway, was from the Taylor family, but I have very little information on the Taylor family. But Emma actually is a Doherty, and her father was Michael Doherty. And Michael Doherty definitely came over in the 1840s, which would fit with the famine, and he again is from Mayo. On John Kerr's side, the Kerrs actually married a family called the Ormsbys. So his mum was Elizabeth Ann Ormsby. Now Ormsby, when I look into the Ormsby family, it's a Lincolnshire name. But actually in the 16th or 17th, actually it was the 16th century, around the Elizabethan era, the Ormsbys went to Mayo and were given a lot of land. And her family is her father, Elizabeth Ann Ormsby, her father was William Ormsby. And again, they're from Mayo, probably from Westport. And it's difficult to know when they came over. Well, when I look at when their siblings were born, it looks to me that's about between 1845 to 1849. So they left Mayo at that time. I'm trying to work out more information about the Ormsbys because I suspect they probably they were more well off than the other members of my family, because the Ormsbys had a lot of land in Mayo, but it's difficult to know what the relationship was. And I will actually go to Mayo at some point and try and work out a bit more about those. But I think they were Protestants, which would fit. But go back to the O'Donnells, they're from Newport in Mayo, and Hugh O'Donnell married a lady called Bridget Highland. Again, that's a Mayo name. And also we also have another strand called the Scots. Now, Scot obviously is a name that was given to anybody who could speak Gaelic, I assume. But I suspect they're again from Mayo. When I submitted my DNA through the ancestry site, and I realised that that's actually that's predicated basically on who actually submits their DNA. So there's an assumption that that your heritage is exact from that, but it probably isn't. But it's quite clear that my family predominantly come from Mayo. Well, my genetic connections are Mayo, not Limerick, as we were all surprised by, because the Barrys are obviously from Limerick, and Shigrew is a Kerry name. We have some connection with Northern Ireland, or the North, through the McCoys, I suspect, and the Henrys. And then we have a connection into Scotland, which again, I suspect that may be a Presbyterian link, where the Scots migrated over. My frustration really, as I pointed out to Greg in my email, is that without becoming political, Brexit's a huge issue for me. It's wrong on so many levels. And lots of people can apply for their Irish passports, but there are lots of us in the Irish diaspora who can't, because we were forced out of Ireland on for economic reasons and for the hunger. But we are not able to claim our Irishness, especially when it's politically very important for me. Not because I have some great belief in forced Irish nationalism, I don't, but I actually feel that there's a fairness, and the Good Friday Agreement is very much predicated on people being fair to people. Sorry, I didn't want to get too politically, but I knew I would, because it really bothers me, and I think it's forcing I suspect it forces our Irishness more, but Brexit has actually brought it out, and it makes me want to pursue it with more vigour, because again, I think it's a way that the English masters are deliberately avoiding the problem that stares them in the face and has done for 6 centuries, basically. Beyond that, I suspect it is an academic interest, really, and it's one that's sort of continuing. I've read a few books, one by Greg, as I've told him, and obviously Professor Belcham's, which is a bit more a difficult term, but very academic. But one of the things I've always been interested in is why. Well, I lived in Leeds for a while. I went to Leeds Medical School, so I went to the Irish Centre there. I'm aware of the Irish connections in Coventry and Birmingham through the GAA, because my kids have played Gaelic. And their Irish community seem much stronger than Liverpool's, which is strange. And it's only now that I'm beginning to connect with the Irish community here. And I think that's based on the fact that Liverpool actually is its own place. And the Irish people in Liverpool have made Liverpool what it is. And the Scouse identity is actually an Irish identity. And people in Liverpool tend to want to be more Scouse than anything else. But actually, it's the Irish that made us Scouse. It's an odd thought, but it's one I've always clung to. And it's led to our political beliefs. And throughout all strands of my family on the Irish side, it's been a strong socialist principle. And I think it comes out to that level of demand for fairness. And it's when you look more into, and I'm a doctor, and I look at health economics a lot, and I look at the way that society plays on health, and I work in a very, very socially deprived area, and when you look at the surnames, it's obvious where they've come from, and that health goes through many generations, and that health, and I've read some articles recently, really around health economics about the effect of something like the hunger would last for at least 5 generations. And I think we're still seeing that. I have the maps of the cholera and the typhus epidemics in the 1840s and the 1860s, and I'm aware of which streets were actually prevalent with those conditions, where there was high incidence, and Leigh Street, for example, Midge-Hall Street. They're areas where my family, the Garrity's, lived in Midge-Hall Street, which actually runs onto Leigh Street, and you'll be aware that actually a lot of Irish people died in the cellars of Leigh Street. In fact, 148 deaths in something like 2 months from typhus in 1862. So all of those things are now pulling me in. So it's the health side, the public health side, the deprivation. Why am I Scouse and not Irish? Why does Liverpool appear not to have such a strong Irish identity the way my Leeds community, I noticed, did? But I suspect it's because actually the Irish Catholic community in Liverpool produced the Liverpool Scouse. I really do think that's it. I think that's the predominant belief I have now, is that's why Liverpool is what it is. You know, it probably should be the 33rd county, really.